Part 5 of the second number of Art in Australia, 1917. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain.
David Low by Bertram Stevens. Illustrated by pencil caricatures of F. McCubbin and Max Meldrum by David Low. While a boy in New Zealand, David Low proved himself to be a facile portraitist in line. The ability to capture a recognisable likeness in a rapid sketch is not common, and few artists anywhere have displayed such skill in portraiture as Low did while a youngster. Time brought him greater ease and more insight into character. His book of caricatures, published in 1915, includes nearly 400 figures and is the best portrait gallery of notable Australasian citizens that we possess. As a caricaturist, Low knows how to exaggerate humorously the external features of his subject, but is seldom grotesque. He lacks the mordant power of Will Dyson, who in many cases has given a subtle and relentless interpretation of the soul of his victim. Low's cartoons and illustrations have always had humour in the actual drawing, and in his social sketches he depicts admirably the insouciant flapper and the blatant knut. They look as if the artist really enjoyed himself while at work upon them, which I am sure was really the case. Low takes his art seriously enough and spares no pains to secure the effect he desires, but he has come to regard his fellow men as material for laughter or derision. Life has been to him a more or less comic pageant, providing plenty of material for his pencil. For that reason, none of his drawings has touched the note of pathos, the tears mixed with laughter which makes so much of the value of Phil May's sketches. Low's early cartoons were drawn on one plane only. They had the precision and a little of the coldness of a geometrical design. As a draftsman, he had something to learn when he began to work for the Bulletin in 1911. He soon learned it, and now he draws with depth and spirit. No longer do his pages depend upon the clean and vigorous line, they are more artistically composed. His observation has become keener, and he gets more bite and force into his portrayal of a political situation. By patient industry and incessant study, Low has developed amazingly during the last 6 years. Now, at the age of 26, he has a fine achievement behind him, but, as with Rabbi Ben Ezra, the best is yet to be.
End of Part 5. Part 6 of the second number of Art in Australia, 1917. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain.
Hans Hasten by Ronald Finlayson. Illustrated by In the Ranges and A Grey Morning. Watercolours in the possession of Anthony Horden's Fine Art Gallery. When Hasten was 16 years old, he went out of his home near Adelaide to paint a couple of gum trees. After 3 years spent between Julian's studio, the Julian so maliciously drawn in Moore's Impressions and Opinions at the Beaux-Arts and in Italy, Hasten returned to South Australia. Since then he has painted many gums, chiefly the beautiful white-trunked gums, which abound near his home at Ambleside. He has painted them in all stages of their growth, under all conditions of sunlight, delicate opalescent saplings at early dawn, and robust full-grown trees under the rays of noon and afternoon, or in the red and gold of evening. Walk a step or two from his house, and one is in the midst of his subjects. He was the first to fully recognise and develop the possibilities resident in the gum, and in spite of the uniformity of subject, his handling of line and light and shade has always charmed away monotony. Under the immediate influence of his landscape, seeing and becoming saturated with its daily life and growth, he paints the gum with unrivalled intimacy and understanding, yet always as a painter who never overlooks the pattern of form and colour. For one almost wholly a landscape painter, there was a danger that this constant preoccupation with one subject might spoil the freshness and spontaneity of his work and hinder further development. But in the last 2 or 3 years, this danger has been seen and averted. A new and robuster freshness is evident in the decorative series of Turkey studies, bright and happy in colour and full of movement, and in the sketches and paintings of the River Murray, in the strength of the red cliffs, in the strangeness of the tree scenery, in the breadth of the low-lying vistas. In his early work, Vinson painted his landscape much as he saw it. One cannot notice the preference and selection that so individualize his later manner. The colour looks solid and heavy, without the characteristic suggestion of suffusing light. Then followed a period when the gum was intimately studied and rendered, with a leaning towards the warm red and gold tones and the slanting light of evening. In many of these pictures there is a pervasive tint of purple that now looks heavy beside the delicate grey and lilac of his recent work. But his attachment to evening effects has become slighter, and now the silver greys of dawn, with the early sunglow lighting the mists, attract him. And here the decorative note is becoming more accented. At times we can catch a distinct hint of Japanese influence. All his work is growing lighter and cooler in key, and it is in this direction that his colour schemes are increasingly tending. For this cooler colour scheme, he has practically abandoned oils, in which medium much of his former work was done, and adopted watercolour. To some extent he has worked in pastels, and there are some delightful studies of Sydney Harbour and haystacks seen under the light of late afternoon. In all Vinson's pictures one is keenly aware of the presence of the sun. In an art so typically Australian, this could hardly be otherwise. His aim, still in the course of such admirable achievement, is the complete rendering of atmosphere permeated and alive with light, clear atmosphere, atmosphere laden with mist, or dust, or the gold dust of the evening, and in and through it all, the sun's light. Thus one marks the absence of strong shadows, the restrained relief of light against light, the silver gold tones of the sun. So far, Vinson's successful solutions of his problem have deservedly charmed both artists and amateurs. The new developments, however, are clearing away some of the soft and pleasing qualities so dear to the amateur. He is looking at, selecting and rendering his subjects in a more masculine and robust manner. That his art will gain much thereby is certain, though amateurs mourn. A man cannot continue to create the same class of beauty without some loss of the original freshness and spontaneity. He must extend and change his method of expression, and this is what Vinson is attempting and achieving.
End of Part 6. Part 7 of the second number of Art in Australia, 1917. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain.
The Baldwin Spencer Collection by Bertram Stevens. Illustrated by Baldwin Spencer. Portrait in oils by the late Phillips Fox. Oil painting in the possession of Sir Baldwin Spencer. During the last century, there was a prejudice against Australian products of any kind, and the pictorial arts struggled through their infancy with little more encouragement than that of the government in 2 or 3 colonies where national galleries had been established. A few men of wealth made collections of pictures of historical interest and paintings of Australian landscape by such artists as Conrad Martens, who looked at our country with eyes trained elsewhere. Australian-born artists had not much prospect of sufficient patronage to enable them to continue painting in Australia, and unless they had independent means or could add some other occupation, they migrated to England. It is true that until the end of the century, there were very few Australian painters whose work was worth collecting. The first of a distinctly national school was Arthur Streeton, whose artistic career virtually dates from 1892. It was a happy chance that the first consistent purchaser of Australian pictures began his collection about this time with one of Streeton's landscapes. The purchaser, Walter Baldwin Spencer, has been for many years Professor of Biology in the Melbourne University. He has earned for himself an eminent place in the world of science by his records and studies of Aboriginal life in Central and Northern Australia. Professor Ernest Scott, in a recent history of Australia, speaks of him as one whose original researches have revolutionised a branch of anthropology. Though born in England, Sir Baldwin Spencer has a very warm affection for Australia and a keen interest in its development. His appreciation of artistic work has been heightened rather than diminished by his scientific studies. The early work of Streeton appealed to him therefore with double force, and he continued to hide his pictures until he now has over 40 representative canvases. As other Australian painters came along who showed good craftsmanship, some specimens of their work were added to the collection. It stands to the great credit of Sir Baldwin that he followed his own judgment and selected what he thought would amongst the paintings of young and unknown artists who have since fully proved their merit. He was one of the earliest buyers of Hilda's and Hayson's work, and he quickly recognised the remarkable quality of Norman Lindsay's pen drawings. Young W.B. McInnes found in Sir Baldwin a generous purchaser of those early oil paintings which showed a promise that has already been fulfilled. The artists already mentioned account for the major portion of the Baldwin Spencer collection. It also contains some fine examples of the art of Sid Long, Ford Patterson, George Lambert, Walter Withers and others, nearly 60 artists being represented, all of whom, save 8, are still living. Of course, in some cases, especially that of George Lambert, the best work of these painters is not in the collection. As a whole, however, it does give a very fair idea of contemporary Australian art. The hard-working biology professor has never been the possessor of large means, but, as he says, he does not need a great outlay to acquire fine pictures. The first of his purchases was for 8 guineas, some have been made for less, and the highest price paid was 100 guineas for Streeton's The Centre of the Empire. For an annual expenditure not greater than what it costs many men to keep a motor car, Sir Baldwin Spencer has adorned his home with things of beauty and acquired an asset of increasing value. The intrinsic interest of the collection to me, great as that is not so important as its effect upon Australian art. That a man of influence in this small community should buy pictures rather than racehorses is in itself a very good thing. Still better that he should choose the work of Australian artists. The example of Sir Baldwin Spencer will be followed by others. Keener interest will be taken in the artistic products of our own country, and perhaps in the near future we will have enough men of taste and judgment to provide the stimulus and the material encouragement without which Australian art will only be a sporadic growth, and the Australian artist an early emigrant to Europe or America.
End of part 7.